Well, we're hoping, seeing what we find from this type of data collection, that it will inform sort of better planning and probably, like you said, more person-centered programs and policies. I don't know that we know exactly. I mean, because this is new, and to be honest, my area is not necessarily transportation. It's the older adults and how their lives are impacted by transportation. So my hope is that we will be able to include other partners as we look at the data to help inform sort of policy and programmatic decisions. But we'll see. Thank you.
When you have the mic, Noel, I'll ask you a question. So how long will participants have the tablets, and then is that data loaded into a database through Wi-Fi, or how is that connecting to keep that information?
Okay, so we are going to have the participants for a total of 30 days. 14 days they'll be using the tablet. The data is uploaded to a cloud subscription all the time, and the GPS pinged every, I think, 30 minutes. And then the other 14 days, they will be doing a traditional pen and paper. So we can compare the data collection, sort of both. But so it's 14 days the tablet and 14 days with the pen and paper.
Has there been any thought about using a wearable tech to supplement the tablets?
Wearing something a wearable?
Yeah.
It's a great idea. I don't think we had the funding to do that this time, but maybe in our next round of funding, hopefully. Thank you.
Any other question?
Regarding the thought program, surprisingly, California housing was more affordable in that program. But also, did you compare with the general housing price versus the actual rental program housing price? There's been some deep gap in the case.
Yeah, sorry. Okay. Yeah. I don't know exactly why it came out that way. I think there's definitely room to ask some questions about the policies in these different states. There's differentials that we could see in the data, so I think we would want to ask some follow-up questions about how the program's implemented differently in each state.
The question.
When I go back there, I live in Kalamazoo, when I go back there, I definitely see Main Street and Benton Harbor as an extension of St. Joseph. Because there are, the development and things that are being used by people are white tourists that come from Chicago or, elsewhere because it's right on Lake Michigan or whatever else. And I'm wondering, in your studies of like the kind of economic growth that's going on, do you think there would be an opportunity maybe to talk about the types of people that are being economically advantaged by that development?
All right, so I don't necessarily know if under the banner of MDOT's research, if I would be able to do that. And not necessarily because they'd be against it, but because that wasn't the focus of the study. But research that I would carry out myself, that's something I'm considering moving forward with. And even in the context of environmental justice, most DOTs, most transportation agencies consider environmental justice in terms of how they prioritize projects. But what I would want to focus on is after those transportation projects are implemented, what impact does that have on the the equity aspect of how the economic development is
Right, how does it
yeah, how does it
people that live in that?
exactly
Right.
Yep.
Interesting. And not to ding the government, I worked for Michigan Department of Health and Human Services for 10 years, so
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah.
Any other question? Oh, yes, sure.
Maybe I was wondering about the intercity bus program. Maybe you could just elaborate on certain challenges that you've seen for intercity bus, and I guess especially in rural areas. I was just
Well, as a lot of different programs, as the more rural, the less density you have, the more difficult it is to implement those programs. And so, when the intercity bus services really changed in the 90s, a lot of the major carriers, the Greyhounds, Jefferson Lines, and those types of carriers really pulled to the interstate. And so a lot of smaller communities lost service. Now, states have the discretion to how they spend that money. Some states like Washington have a very integrated approach to try and provide corridors to connect rural transit systems into that national network of carriers. Some states do a request for proposals, so they'll say we have X amount of funding available, and carriers will say, well, we'd like to start this route, and this is how much of a subsidy we need. Washington and other states are being very much more strategic and saying, here's a corridor we've identified we want filled, and then we'll put that out for bids to see who could do it at the lowest subsidy. So I think you see a dichotomy or diversity among what states are doing, but certainly if you're going to have the biggest impact is to have the state do that strategic plan to say what are those key corridors they want filled, and then put those out for bid to find the carrier who will do that for the lowest subsidy.
Presentation on the importance of location would seem to suggest that the investment in getting people into areas that are sustainable, vibrant, active, accessible is an issue of relocating as opposed to providing assistance in place. Is that an issue or is something you need to touch on?
by assistance in place. You mean like putting the housing where the people are already living, or?
Well, it sounds like investment, well, I interpret you saying investment is most advantageous if it's invested in the right location, but the needs may be dispersed differently. So does HUD and their investments look at, this is the location where the assistance is most formal, let's bring people who have needs into those facilities versus assistance in place for the need. Again, may well be that
Yeah.
program.
Well, this is not my primary area of research, so I think Shima would be the best person to ask about the intricacies of the HUD program. But it's you could look at this as focusing on one area, one important area of concern when making decisions about HUD programs, but it's not the only area. So there's also going to be concerns about bringing the housing to where the people are living. So that might be an alternative concern to keep in mind. But I think if our concern is affordability, as is one of HUD's primary concerns, the 30% level that they've already set for themselves, then they should be considering transportation in that calculation. But that's not the only calculation they use.
One more question.
are the opportunities and risk of these services? Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think the risks are we have in public transit really good frameworks for equity. And when you start to introduce in these public-private partnerships, when you provision services to Uber or Lyft or other types of shared mobility, you might lose out on some of those key equity elements. So I think it's really important for cities to be very clear from the onset. I mean, the good thing is that transit agencies, if they don't follow like Title VI, if they don't follow all of these really important tenets, they are going to be sued. So like that is definitely a part of the transit programs. But if cities start developing new programs that maybe forget those elements or somehow adapt them in ways that are not as effective, then I think that is a big risk. But I think the potential gain is we're getting smarter with our technology. Like, for example, paratransit, you often have to book a ride, like at minimum 48 hours in advance. So how can you plan your, like, I don't plan my life until 5 minutes before my trip. So how can you, like, that is not a good expectation. And we have the technology to improve that. I mean, we have a phone that can do everything in our pocket and smarter than we are. So I think we should harness that technology. It's just a matter of making sure that the public agencies and nonprofits are involved and are making the decisions versus Uber and Lyft being bullies and pushing their way into making decisions.
Right, according to my watch, it is 3:10 and we're supposed to end. Let us give a round of applause to all the presenters. Thank you.